Good afternoon. I'm Dean Glass, and on behalf of SOHO, Save Our Heritage organization, I am delighted to welcome you to this special Zoom panel discussion, Tracing Your Home's Roots, Utilizing Local Archives, as we celebrate American Archives Month, recognizing the invaluable importance of preserving our community's historical records. We are privileged to have four esteemed San Diego organizations and agencies with us today who will share their knowledge and experience while informing and guiding you on how best to utilize San Diego's archives to research and learn about your old house. To guide us, we are pleased to have historian and planner for the California State Parks Department, Mr. James Newland, as our moderator. Jim has been a stalwart in the field of historic preservation since 1991 and is past president of the Mesa History Center. He has an MA in public history from San Diego State and has authored 4 insightful books on local history and made countless contributions to our community's heritage, and will also represent La Mesa History Center's archives on the panel today. Thank you all for joining us, and let's give a warm welcome to our moderator, Jim Newland.
I will go ahead and do a brief introduction of our panelists today. Then we will be going through a set of pattern questions to help everybody answer from the different perspectives of all these different institutions. And then at the end, we will have some time for questions. So if you have a question, please put it into the chat so that we can find it at the end there. And then we'll try to respond to as many as time allows us. And if it's a specific question to a specific institution, make sure you note that in your chat question for us. All right. So joining me today, we're very pleased to have a couple of representatives from the Coronado Historical Association. Vicki Stone, who is the curator of collections. Ms. Stone has a Master's of Arts degree in Museum Studies from Indiana University, Purdue in Indianapolis. During her studies, she worked with numerous history collections in Colorado, Alaska, and Indiana, and notably served as a closed fellow at the Edinburgh Museum, if I probably pronounced that wrong, American Indian and Western Art in Indianapolis. Amongst other interesting parts of her career, she served for a while as a collections contractor for the FBI's art crime team and helped them on their largest single recovery of cultural property in FBI history. See if she wants to answer a thing about that. That sounds like an interesting one. And she currently serves as the curator of collections at the Historical Association. Also joining us from Coronado is Executive Director Christine Stokes. All right, so welcome to Vicki and Christine. Representing La Jolla Historical Society, we have Dr. Dana Hicks. Dr. Hicks is a museum professional with a 30-year history of working in museums, libraries, cultural centers, and with Native tribes. She specializes in celebrating cultural diversity, collections management, curation of art and history exhibitions, and has experience in archaeology and NAGPRA topics. Her academic background includes 2 bachelor's degrees in history and anthropology, a master's degree in history, public history, and a PhD in history, specializing in Native American and early modern world history, as well as public history. So thanks, Dana, for being here from La Jolla. All right, and our largest contingent comes from our friends at the county archives, and that includes three panelists for us today. Jeanette Notarangelo is the assistant division chief at the County of San Diego Assessor, Recorder, County Clerk's Office. Their acronym ARCC, you may see on occasion and when you're searching for them. Jeanette's primary office is in San Marcos branch office, where she runs day-to-day operations of the Recorder County Clerk staff and services. As an assistant division chief, she also shares responsibility for overseeing Recorder County Clerk functions for the entire division. And she's now 24 years of county service, with the majority of it being at the ARCC. Kira Sullivan is a processing archivist with the ARCC, where she manages the San Diego County map collection. Prior to joining the team, her archival work took place in local government and university archive settings. She earned her master's degree in library science with a concentration of archives management from Simmons College in Boston. All right. And our third and final panelist from the group there is Jeff De La Rosa, who is a cadastral supervisor. For you non-geography majors, that means he's a mapping supervisor and works in the mapping division of the assessor's office. I was a former geography major, so I do know how to translate that, thanks, for a while. Jeff's role at the assessor's office has been as a clerk in the public informations unit and a cadastral technician, senior cadastral technician, and a GIS analyst, and GIS being very important now to all our agencies in mapping and tracking things. So, and it just happens that Jeff and his family have been here since 1980. One of those brought by his father being in the Navy. It's a very typical story we'll hear. And if you're doing research in your house, you might not be surprised to find out that you have some military folks who once lived in it, perhaps here in San Diego. So that's our panel. It's really great to be involved. And so thanks you all for joining us. And I'm going to just sort of do a real brief sort of introduction about the topic today of tracing your home's roots, right? How to find out about the history of your house and how us at these institutions can help you find those sources and the materials that are going to help you tell that story of your house and your property that you own there, if that's what you're interested in learning about, right? And so whether you're interested in going forward with a possible historic landmark nomination report, or do you just want to learn a little more about your property and who were the residents and the builders and all, and, you know, I would just say that it tends to be, house history tends to be, or housery as sometimes we joke with it, with our folks who come in and get their housery together, is really can be a very rewarding experience. Because not only are you going to just identify those good, solid, documentable facts to base your history of your property on, you may actually confirm or dispel lore or legend or mythology about your house or your neighborhood, or you may be able to finally prove that there's some truth to some of that, right? And that's part of sort of the benefit of doing that. And so it can be very rewarding just to understand those who's and how's and the evolution of your property, which is part of what you're going to be finding out about as you sort of dig through these sources to try to put together that history of your house. Because every house, every property has a history. Somebody's just got to gather the data and put it together, right? And that's what you're hoping to do. So you may, you know, and it's also very something that sometimes a lot of people ask me, what is it like? It's sort of detective work in a little way. It's historical detective work a lot of times. And you may find out that your house does have a noted architect or a master builder, but you also may find out that your house was built or designed by a small independent contractor who maybe did a few houses or maybe did hundreds of houses. But you won't know about that until you dig in there and try to figure out what the story is on the history of that property. So you also may find people who have amazing national, regional, or local significance, or you may just find that you have a nice blue-collar family that bought the house and lived there and took care of it and raised their family there. And either way, the history is just as significant and just as fascinating for you. So I hope we'll be able to help you on that track. Now, today on our talk, we're going to really sort of try to introduce you to some of the sources and how our institutions can help you get to some of those sources that we may have or others may have to help you start that search and get moving. So this will be a very quick sort of high-level intro in some ways to the primary and secondary kind of sources that we use and we recommend that you use in doing this kind of research. So everything from published works, books, magazines, newspapers, directories, and such, to public records. You're going to hear a little bit about that, whether that's, you know, real property records or tax records or permits or building permits or water and sewer permits, the things that you can use to help pin down facts about your property that helps you understand its history, right? You're going to hear a little bit about, you know, the historic photograph collections that can be very helpful, not only street level sort of shots of things, but aerial photographs and things that help you can show the evolution of your property, as well as a lot of what we call, would normally be known as genealogical sources, right? Censuses, family histories, and other things you might find on some of, you know, those known websites, the ancestries and the genealogy websites that we often tap to help us fill in gaps and get information too, as well, to help tell those stories. It's also the fact that some of our institutions have personal and private collections of institutions and individuals that may have information about your house, neighborhood, et cetera, that you can glean from. So those kinds of things. And you also learn just a little smattering about architectural history and how to define what kind of type and style your house might be. And trust me, that could be its own training and schedule, and try to decipher all the various styles and components and categories of how people define houses and their styles and types. But we're going to give you the basics so you can understand a little bit about that today. So these sources sort of fall into two different sort of, I call info categories that you're going to be looking for. The first is sort of land use and construction history of your property. You know, can you define when was the structure built? Was there a designer? Who is it? When was it built? Have there been alterations to the property, which are things that you would need to put into a landmark report, for example, to explain why it still has integrity to be eligible. The other side is that people's social history side. Who were the owners? Who were the builders? Who lived there? Who used the property? And so there are a lot of the sources you'll find are sort of in both those elements that you put together to try to give yourself a more complete story of your house and your property. And I'll just, warn folks that sometimes this research can be very needle in the haystack. There's lots of little pitfalls and things we'll talk about. You will find that you need often multiple identifiers, which is important to know not only the address, but say the parcel number, because I will tell you, and you'll find this in all areas around the county, address numbers and street names change over time. And so sometimes you can't trace your property back by the current property all the way, or the current address all the way. So there's things like that that we can help, having done this enough now, to help people when they hit those roadblocks. And you will hit roadblocks, and then you will come back and go in a different direction, and you'll get some more source material, and then you'll go back to that source and you'll find it. Those kinds of things. So you have to have a little dedication and persistence in that. And the other thing is you have to be careful, because not all facts are always accurate. And I'm going to give you an example of something. Right, so this is my San Diego State Basketball National Championship t-shirt from 2023. It's real, I can touch it, see, do the David Letterman thing, right? But is that an accurate statement of what happened last? I was there in Houston. Yeah, they were the almost champs. They weren't the champs. But in 20 years, if you found this artifact, it says they're the champs. Is this accurate? So sometimes you're going to have to question those facts you find. They're not always accurate, whether it's real or it's written in the record, whether that's a public record or some other source, right? So it's a little bit of that too, as you're trying to find corroborating resources and to confirm what we're talking about. So that's my sort of basic intro. And so we want to really get into this. And so we're going to start off with our first question. And I'm going to go ahead and lead this one off for us. And that first question is, what resources or assistance does your archive offer to homeowners conducting research on their home? And so I'll just tell you that the Mesa Historical History Center has our archives room. Our open public hours are only on Saturdays from 1 to 4 p.m. We're located at 8369 University Avenue at the corner of Pine Street. And the reason our hours are so slim is because we don't have any paid staff at the History Center. Though there are professional historians, myself, and our current president, Veronica Marcel, is a professional archivist, we are all volunteers to the organization. So it's a challenge for us to operate more than on Saturdays on regular hours. But we do also provide a research service. And so people can contact us via email or phone or whatever. And we charge $25 an hour for basic research services if you want us to look into your property, if you're not able to make it on Saturdays, or you just want us to sort of jump ahead for you. So that's sort of where we are. The other thing about our organization is to understand our geographic scope of collections. What do we cover from a history area? Though people assume we're just the city of La Mesa's historical group, we actually cover a broader area that we call the greater La Mesa area, which includes the unincorporated communities surrounding us, such as Fletcher Hills, Grossmont, Mount Helix, Casa de Oro, and Rancho San Diego, as well as some of the areas in eastern San Diego that have historical connections to the La Mesa area, places like Allied Gardens and San Carlos del Cerro, the college neighborhoods. We have pretty good collections there, and that partially comes from my work in starting a community history project there in the college neighborhoods in the 90s. Those collections are now at the archives at the La Mesa History Center. And sometimes we might have information beyond that into more mid-city and those kind of areas as well, just depending on the collection. But our focus is sort of that greater La Mesa area. And so that's sort of where we are. That's what we can provide to you. And so I'm going to pass it on now to Vicki at Coronado to explain a little bit about their programs and resources they have available.
And actually, I'm going to pass it off to our executive director, Christine.
No problem.
Wonderful. We'll both be popping in and out. Yeah, so our research center is actually the second floor of our museum, and we're open by appointment for our research center because our entire archives is in what was originally the vault to the bank that our museum is housed in. And so you'll make an appointment, and you can do that online or by phone, and you will work with either Vicki or myself and one of our volunteers, and we'll pull the items for you. And so we'll come to the research center to do research. Our primary items for researching your home, we have the lot cards from the original lot sales here in Coronado. building permits through the 1960s, Sanborn fire maps, which we'll be talking about later. And then we also have biography files. So we really concentrate on Coronado, but not just the village. So we go all the ways down through the Cays and to the Coronado Heights. And so if you're looking for more information also about Navy, people who maybe had homes across the bridge that are actually were stationed here at North Island or at the amphibious base. We also have those archives here.
Great, thanks. Dana, do you want to go for La Jolla now?
Sure. So the La Jolla Historical Society's collections encompass over 80 years of actively collecting archival material, such as books, maps, scrapbooks, ephemera, fine art, newspapers, street and land use files, business and personal documents, and historic and archaeological artifacts. We hold a large array of photographs, postcards, architectural drawings, and oral histories. In researching house histories, oh, by the way, we're open by appointment for research, but it would be Tuesday through Friday, 8 to 4. So in researching house histories, we regularly use our street file collection, aerial photograph collection, inventories of histories of homes written in the past by the La Jolla Historical Society. And by conducting general searches in our collections database, we also have a very interesting real estate card collection that comes in handy quite often. For our process of conducting research, the best way is to send an email describing what you're looking for. You can go onto our website under Collections and Research, and from there you can send your message. Once received, I'll conduct a research in our collection and get back to you. If we find something significant that you would like to view, we can then set an appointment for you to come in to our offices, and there's no charge for any of these services. We're also in the process of cataloging our collection right now, made possible by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We have 2 amazing interns working on writing up our container lists of each box in our collection. We still have a way to go. However, you can take a look at those container lists we have completed on our page on the Online Archive of California, which as of today totals 61 collections completed so far. Next year, we will be launching a new resource on our own website where we'll be uploading scans from our photograph and postcard collections, and you will be able to view these images from the comfort of your own home, among other archival material as well. So I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thanks. All right, so our colleagues from the county archives, who would like to start out there?
I can go ahead. This
Great.
is Jeanette Notarangelo, and for the older documents, we're working on projects to make it easier for the public to research right now, but we are indexing the information on the older documents for the grantor grantee index, so you'll be able to research by name. We also have projects at this time that where they are taking the older microfilm and digitizing the images as we're trying to get the best possible images of these older documents. Today, to retrieve the older documents, you can go to any one of the branches, and that would be Santee, San Marcos, Chula Vista, or San Diego. And they will have an application in the lobby, which is Digital Reel. In the San Diego office, we have room 103 where they have more computers and more assistance available for your research needs. To locate a document, you'll need at least one index characteristic, either the document number, the reel and image number, the name, or the date recorded. You want to consider what information you have before deciding where to begin. Once you have located the indexed information, you want to write down all the pertinent information or take a picture with your phone of the information, such as a document number, reel, image, date, etc., to help you locate your document. To look for older deeds, you will need an owner's name and year. If you don't have that information, but you have a parcel number, you can work with the clerks in the realty division, and they can look at the mastery property record. So that record would include parcel numbers for the property. Sometimes it will display document numbers for the deeds and owners' names, or book and page numbers to find the documents. Once you retrieve that information, you'll be able to find the documents in the digital reel application. For documents pre-1960, it will require a book and page number to retrieve the document. The fees for the copy of a document are $2 for the first page and 5 cents for each additional page. And if you need a certified copy, it will be an additional $1. To find documents from 1980 to the present, you can look in our acclaim system, as you'll find the document index and image for documents within these years. For 1970 to 1979, you can start with the acclaim system, and there will be no image available, but you'll be able to find the grantor, grantee, and document number, which you can use to locate documents in digital reel official records. Prior to 1970, the research would be all in digital reel. So 1960 to 1970, if you have a document number, you can go directly to the official records for that year. If not, you have the date recorded, the date that the document was recorded, you can bring that number in and find it in the numeric index in digital reel. And if you don't have that, you'll need to start at the grantor grantee index for the particular year, and that still would be in digital reel. For 1931 to 1959, the documents for these years are not organized by year, but instead by book range. Each range contains numerous years organized chronologically. You begin by searching the grantor or grantee index in order to create a document number. So a grantor would be a person that would be granting the property to somebody, and the grantee would be the person who is receiving the property. In 1845 to 1930, these are organized by books, each containing a sequence of years in chronological order, and these books contain only deeds. In 1846 to 1967, miscellaneous records contain records other than deeds, such as list pendants, patents, mining claims, etc. You will need to begin at the miscellaneous records index in order to locate any miscellaneous records. We also record maps, and maps are not only recorded in San Diego, but there's other county departments that have maps, and other city departments and state departments. So we just have 4 map types that we record. And so we do have a list of where you can get other map types in case you need that. But that would be it for me.
Great. Well, that's a great start on the public record and those really important, like I was saying, real property title records, right? Because those are what you get from those are the names of the people to search and figure out, what that. So that's really helpful for that. So thank you for that detail. Our next question is sort of broadening out a little bit to our institutions of, what specific types of records and materials does your archive hold that is really most useful in researching the history of a historic home? And a couple of you have mentioned a few of them, but is there a chance to dominate? So maybe Christine, Vicky could go first for Coronado on this one.
Sure. Christine kind of touched on some of the things that we have in our collection that are helpful. And as Jim noted, some things are really related to the actual structure itself, the building itself, the land use. And those are things like the lot sale cards, Sanborn maps, building permits. We have the city of Coronado's building permits. And we also have aerial photography and 3 historic surveys that have been done over time. Just like Jim was saying, is you kind of can't take everything at face value. Luckily, we have our archivists and our volunteers on site can help interpret maybe some of those things and say, what does it mean if your house was on a survey in the past and that sort of thing. We also have real estate MLS listings when they were printed and not digital. And we have directories as well. But really, I think where the Coronado Historical Association's collection shines the most is on those social histories. Who lived in your property? Where were they invested in the community? What kinds of clubs or organizations were they a part of? Did they serve on city council? Were they involved in the schools? Were they military personnel? Those kinds of things is a little bit harder to just pin down a few resource types other than newspapers, but we do have things like scrapbooks or social clubs and organization archives, other things that, and the biography files, as Christine mentioned, that help get to more of the who is living in your home and why might they be significant to your community. And so those are kind of the brief overview of the kinds of things that we have, but we don't take anything off the table. We'll do, as Dana mentioned, we have a database system. So every property we search, we will do a thorough look through our database and look also for names, previous homeowners or tenant names as well, to make sure we're capturing as much information as we can about a property.
Fantastic. Yes, you'll find some overlap from all of us here because the sources are all that. It's just what our scope of collections and our time frames and those kinds of things that we have coverage of than others may have, that kind of support. So Dana, you want to go ahead and elaborate a little more from La Jolla collections?
Sure. Ours is very similar to that. Like I was saying before, we have a collection of street files, which we have 36 boxes, all in alphabetical order of each street. And of course, our collection is made up of things that have been donated to us. So if someone has donated the material to us, it's going to be there. And those street files are full of land use records, photographs, anything archival that you can think of. So some of the addresses, of course, have more information on them than others, but we'll do search in those. Our aerial photographs, again, we have in order of decades, so you can look through those and see if there was a change on the property or when it first appeared there. We also have a phone book collection that goes back through the 1920s. Our newspaper collection goes back to the 19-teens. We have biographical files, same thing. Files in alphabetical order of people who have lived here over time, and different organizations. And then those real estate cards I was telling you about come in very handy. And we also have oral histories as well that we're going to start working on as well too. So, but like I said, if you contact us, I can do a database search through all of this material and see what pops up. Oh, we also have, of course, architectural drawings and blueprints and things like that. Our nicest, I think, collection is the Thomas Shepard collection, who is a architect here. We have all of his, well, maybe not all, but his original drawings. We have quite a few drawers full of those. So it's really nice when someone happens upon those. They're not only informative, but they're beautiful, all hand drawn.
Wonderful. That's great. All right. Maybe our county folks can add some more on this.
Sure.
Question.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kira. I'm an archivist at the county archives. And before I go into what we have in the archives, I just wanted to sort of situate the archives in where we live. So the county archives is a program of the Recorder County Clerk Division of the Assessor Recorder County Clerk Department. And so the recorder part of that division is responsible for maintaining and preserving the official records of the County of San Diego. And according to California Government Code, official records, the definition of that is the permanent archival record of anything that has been accepted for recording by a county recorder. So that is what we collect in the county archives. We collect the permanent archival records that were accepted for recording by the county recorder since the start of the county in 1850. So the records that we have in the archives are all documents related to ownership of land and transactions of real and personal property. So these property records include approximately 170,000 sheets of maps. And then we've got, in paper, we have 450 cubic feet of recorded documents and 33,000 rolls of microfilm. The types of records are things like anything you can think of related to land transactions. So there's deeds, certificates of sale, there's leases. We have some water claims and mining claims, patent books, estrays, all of these sorts of things that relate to property. In addition to that, because we're part of the Recorder County Clerk, part of the county clerk's function is to record births, death, and marriages. So we have a collection of pre-1905 historic birth, death, and marriage records. In July 1905, a law was passed making the state the primary record holder. So that's why we're particularly strong in pre-July 1905 birth, death, and marriage records. After that, the state is the primary record holder. But today, we are still the primary record holder for records of confidential marriages. So that's kind of what we've got going on in the county archives world over in Santee, but we are a part of the Recorder County Clerk Division. Our counterpart in our larger department is the assessor's office. So I'd love to turn it over to Jeff if Jeff had anything to add, because we don't collect assessor records in the county archives at the present time. But the assessor's office side does create records that could be useful to you as well.
Sure, I'll describe what we do here in the mapping division. So the map, I'm with the mapping division of the Assessor County Clerk. We're located at the County Administration Center on 1600 Pacific Highway, right across the street from the Star of India. I'm part of what's called assessment services. So there's assessment services and mapping. Mapping, in our department, we do everything that has to do with property boundary changes. So any new subdivisions that come in, any new condominiums that come in, any boundary adjustments between property owners, we make those adjustments to the parcels and basically change whatever is on the map now and make it conform to whatever was recorded, whether, like I said, it's a map or a document of some type. It could be something as simple as a deed. So we are the first stop to kind of create that parcel to become part of the assessment records that eventually somebody would get a tax bill on. Since we do a lot of the parcel changes, a lot of our interaction with the public would be researching deeds to prior to 72. 1972 is the date when the Subdivision Map Act came in. And if your property is not described in a deed the way it is now, their planning department won't grandfather it in to comply with that Subdivision Map Act. You'll have to go through some other process to give legal lot status to that parcel, whether it's a certificate of compliance or a parcel map. So that's where a lot of our interaction with the public is in terms of research. And that's not to say that we can't do anything further back in 1972, because we do at times. We have a dedicated public information staff here at 1600 Pacific Highway at the County Administration Center in room 103. We're open 8 to 5. We have about half a dozen people who, that's all they do is just serve the public when they come in. And that could be something as simple as helping, disseminate a tax bill, or informing them on who the property owner is on the parcel. But yeah, we have a dedicated staff to do that. And if it involves mapping, we have dedicated mapping staff to come out and help them with any mapping related questions. If you're doing research on a parcel, most of the time it does end up on the lap of mapping, just because when customers come in, most of the time all they have is either an address or APN. So usually what we start with is what the current APM looks like. And APM meaning the assessor parcel map, we just call it APM for short. We'll start there because that is the best starting point. Some people just have an address, and finding it on a map will establish the current deed on the property, who the owners are, and then we can work our way back from there. So we have the mainframe that we can use right now. So from that current ownership that the customer just came in with, we can track it back in our digital system, the mainframe, and that'll take you back. Sometimes it'll take you back to the 70s if you're lucky, but most of the time it'll just take you back into the 1980s. But at least, instead of having to research a grantor grantee index for 40 years worth of, of records year by year, it'll at least show you the chain of title for that time frame. Within that time frame, you can hop into the claim system and start searching there, and that'll take you back into the 60s, I believe. Or is it 60 into the 70s? It'll take you into the 70s. And then if you can track it back that far, what the assessor records has is what's called the MPR, the master property records. And the master property records, again, it's just an index of who was being assessed at that time, which should represent who the owners were, right? So once you get into MPRs, those will take you into the 1950s. So now you're into the 1950s, you've covered a great deal of time at that point without having to research year by year. So once you're into the 1950s, you can go even further back. Now you're in what's called the lot books, and the lot books will take you into the 1800s. So the lot books, those are people who come in here and are really research savvy. That's a very good, useful tool for them to track ownership and parcel changes over the years. So that, in the simplest terms, that's how you go from our current records back to the late 1800s, mid 1800s. The assessor parcel maps, they didn't come into existence until around the 1950s. So when people tried to look for parcel maps into the 1940s, 30s, they just didn't exist. They started coming to being in the 1950s. So prior to that, it was all done on lot books and just off of legal descriptions. So those are the services that are and resources here that we have available. Like Kira said, we do have assessment records. So if somebody wanted to research those, we have what's called building records, and they'll give property characteristics for a particular piece of property dating back to when the parcel came to existence. The building records will have permit numbers, and even though it may be a parcel within the city, at least it'll have a permit number. So now they can go to the city and use that as a resource to look at building permits if they're available. So yeah, since we're the assessor's office, we're basically the keeper of assessment records and tax records, right? So like I mentioned earlier, if you know who was being assessed at a certain time frame, you could use that record to basically use in your research to do chain of title or historical research.
Great, thanks. Yeah. So the other thing that to remind you all is this really gives you a chance to bone up on your civics. Difference between city records and county records and state records, right? And understand the difference. And there's water districts and there's all kinds of other sources too to think about where you might be able to tap in. And they all have their different record systems, and that's great. And the assessors, and I'll mention a little bit how in La Mesa how we have, it's going to be somewhat similar, but some unique things. We actually have the city of La Mesa's initial tax assessor books from 1912 to 1923, the city incorporated, which are very helpful because why do we want to know tax records? Because often what you'll find is this helps you define when the building would have been built, because you'll see a change in the assessment from just property value to improvement values. And so that gives you a clue that, hey, something was built there on that previous year. They start taxing again in 1913. Something probably was built in 1912 or in that vicinity, right? And so that's why somebody would want to go take those lot books all the way back if you've got a property that goes back that far and pull those out, and because that will give you a lot of information in one source to chase your title back. So in La Mesa, we have very similar, we have the directories which are used, and I'll just say a little bit about directories. They're sort of like phone books, but they're more than phone books, because back in that period, people would often put information about their profession and other things in there that will help you get more clues. Also, in the city of San Diego, it's starting in 1926, they are crisscross directories, which means you don't have to look them up just alphabetically by person's name. You can look it up by street address. For example, the city of La Mesa wasn't big enough until 1952 to get a crisscross. So previous to that years, you have to look it up by just alphabetical name, look for the person and see if there's an address listed, which we didn't even really have addresses in our directories till 1922. And just, you know, the first addresses were 3 digits. And in 1931, the post office made them change them all to 4 digits, of which none of those numbers had anything to do with each other. So there's no good correlation, right? So just to make it nice and difficult for you to chase sometimes. But so for us, you know, we have that thing. The other thing we have unique is we are one of the only holders of the La Mesa Scout newspaper. There is a microfilm copy at the State Library when they made us a microfilm copy, which a few years ago we were able to digitize. So we can now word search our local paper, which will have a lot more of that social club information, social public, you know, what locally community, how are people involved in the community sources that really don't exist anywhere else. We also have the first 60 years of the El Cajon Valley News, which goes back to 1892 up to 1950, also digitized now, so we can search those. A lot of crossover news. A lot of times the publishers were the same people who ran both papers, etc. So those kind of things are often very, once you get down to looking into some people and who they were in the community for yourself. Obviously, we also have access to the San Diego Union database. I mean, for a guy who spent too much time staring at microfilm in my early career and have stacks of copies in my file cabinets in the garage, database is now available. That's fully digitized. So if you have access either through several different platforms, you can word search both the Tribune and the Union, which is a big help in figuring out if somebody's very active or there's news about it, or if your property's had a lot of changes or activity, especially if it has some commercial aspect. Often you'll find out ads and those kinds of things. So we have a lot of that. We also have a vertical file collection. You've heard from folks this. We have what we call our property files, which are also identified by address. And that includes everything from all the notes from our 1980s historical survey for those properties. But we also were given the Leonard Smith real estate collection about 6 years ago, which was a long-standing real estate agent in the area who kept his listing files in a cabinet. And when his son retired a few years ago, gave them to us. And we have the listing cards from most of the collections from the mid-50s, but it'll include a photograph, description of the property, so you can figure out, hey, has been major changes? Who might have? And there'll be notes. Oh, by the way, this was a Henry Hester designed building. No else it's popping up anywhere. It's on the card. Gives you a search to go figure that out if it's true. So those kinds of things are very helpful to us, and people will come in and look in that. We also have vertical files on individuals and families, as well as lists over the years on research on architects and designers in a category, as well as builders and contractors, because sometimes you won't actually have an architect. It's a contractor who did it and maybe just had a plan set that was stamped but didn't hire an architect, and it still may be a beautiful custom house, but it doesn't have an architect. But you can find that out and then find out how prominent that designer or the builder was in the community and process, right? We have some collections, like for John Mortensen was a very popular Mount Helix, La Mesa area, a guy who did custom mid-century modern homes, for example. We have a lot of information about him and his work, even though he was never a licensed architect. We also, from my own personal collection of years of spending time in Los Angeles and hanging out at the UCLA Young Library in the evenings, copies of all of the San Diego news that was in the Southwest Builder and Contractor magazine and the Southwest Contractor Manufacturer, which started in 1893, stopped publishing permits in 1949. Those over the years, I would collect those and have them, and we have that accessible at the archive, which is unfortunately now, I think the city's public libraries misplaced their copies of those or something when they moved, but is a great place to see announcements of permits or building news that was putting out to the contracting community. So there's often lots of information about architects pulling things. In one of our houses, for example, on our tour this year, the Todd House, there were several very large announcements about La Mesa has a very nice house being built, in December, January 1911-12, right, in this regional magazine, right? So when our newspaper collection is pretty thin at that time. So things like that can help us. So we have those kinds of things. We also have our own, some architecture collections, local mid-century architect Robert Delorier's collection. We have his scrapbooks, for example, and others. We also have, some really interesting collections. The La Mesa Women's Club collection came to us a few years ago. That's the oldest service club in La Mesa, goes back to 1902, and really helps us track the history of the ladies in our community, who up until the 60s, you might find when you search them, are listed as Mrs. John Smith. And and you have to figure out, well, what was her name, right? All this, and what did she do? Oh, well, look, she was involved in all these, important civic. Those kind of collections can help us explain. Sometimes it's not just the gentleman of the house who has a significant role in the community. It can be that, and so those women's history sources are also very helpful for us in telling those stories of the community as well. We have well over 10,000 historic photos. We're in the process now of starting to put them into our Preservica system, so that we hopefully within a year or two will be able to have a lot of that available up on the website and to our members. We're just getting to that. We pretty much have our inventory cut up. We are also have interns from San Diego State and other volunteers working on our collections to make those accessible. So we hope to have them in a database soon, just so we can search them for researchers, as well as eventually getting into an interface for the public to see what we have. We have some fascinating collections there. We also have lots of copies of the subdivision and some of these maps and things that, as well as census records and those that we got from other sources. So you have it as a reference there at the archives, so that if you come in, we can look those up and help you cross-reference. We also happen to have all of the high school yearbooks for Grossmont and Helix High School, which are very helpful when you're trying to chase families and other projects to see whose face is in the yearbook and what they're doing, and those kids and all that kind of stuff, and learning more about the role of the family in the community. Oral histories, all our landmark nominations and reports, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the same stuff, but for our geographic area that we've collected over the years to help people understand where those sources might be. And eventually we probably lead them back to, hey, you may need to go to the county and get your building record. You may need to go, it's time to go search the lot books because we're hitting dead ends, and see if we can follow back and can confirm construction and ownership on some of these properties to help us tell the full story. Great. All right, so we can move to our next question now, which is, how can homeowners navigate the archives catalog or finding aids to locate relevant records and materials? And so we've sort of touched it, but if there's anything to add here, we'll start with Dana on that one.
So I think I mentioned before, the navigation would be you sending me an email. Like I said, you can go through our website and send in a request, and then I'll do some initial searching, see what we have. I'll get back to you on what I came up with, and then we'll decide, do you want to come out and take a look at the material? If so, then we'll set an appointment to do that. And usually while people are here in my office, we end up digging deep into other things as well, because the conversation sort of starts. And then I have the database right here, and we can start looking things up and seeing what we can pull out of the archive.
Great. County, do you want to add any more about how to get hold of you guys?
Sure, thank you. So I just wanted to mention that our archives is actually quite young. We're just a few years old. So we're currently processing and describing our collections and finding aids. There is other description available. Jeanette mentioned a lot of ways that you can search if you know certain data points, because there's been incredible indexing done throughout the years by the recorder, county clerk staff. But when it comes to archival finding aids, right now we do have collection level description up on the Online Archive of California website that Dana mentioned earlier. So if you go to the Online Archive of California's website, you can see all of the contributing institutions from around California who have decided to share their finding aids of their archival resources on that website. So if you navigate to the San Diego County Archives landing page, you can click into any of the collections that are listed there and read a collection level description of it. And we are updating these records with complete finding aids, including box lists, as we process the collections. But our most current up-to-date available description will be on that OAC website. Yeah, that's it.
Great. And I'll do this one for La Mesa. Yeah, and so currently right now it's sort of if you come in directly we can connect, but we also recommend that you send an email, and our direct email info@lamesahistory.com. They all come to me, and then I sort them out. And so I can get back to you and say, yeah, it sounds like you need to come in, or yeah, we got that stuff. And if you're interested, the research service probably take me a couple hours to gather, and then we can meet or whatever. We generally work something out like that. Or if on occasion we can set an appointment separate from our regular open hours, if it works out for someone to be there. And we are slowly entering, as I mentioned, our collections into the online Archive California. We're probably at about a dozen right now in there, but our goal is to get some more interns and really work on that. And to do that, you need to sort of create that finding aid and then get it loaded up. So that helps us. Some of our larger collections we're trying to get up so people understand. We do have the Women's Club collection, or the local American University Women's collection from the 50s and 60s, and what they were doing in the community. So things like that we want to let people know that this is out there. And we, so we're just sort of getting that point now also, like I said, where we're getting to our software, where we're hoping to start loading our photographs and getting them fully in there into, in this case, the Preservica system, not only for us as a source to help search, but hopefully in that interface that we can have with the public to be able to see the kinds of breadth of collections we have. Because it's like you said, it's sort of, it often turns when someone comes in, they're not sure exactly how far they're going to go with this or whatever, and they're sort of feeling away. It's good to sort of come in, meet. We can sort of show you what the trajectory is. Sometimes that's when they'll decide, give me the list of consultants, like, so I can hire somebody to do this. Which, if your property has a lot of complexity, I will just tell you that it's probably worth the $4 or $5 grand or whatever it is to hire the person to do your report, because they have all this, they know all this stuff we're talking about, because they live it, right, as their profession. And especially if you have a property that maybe is sort of on the edge of eligibility, to have them help you explain why it is or isn't eligible and make that case in your report so that you hopefully can get your property listed. And having just received my, thank you, Assessor's Office, my Mills Act reduction here in the mail the other day, you would like to do that, considering what we're paying these days for houses. And I just bought a listed house in Kensington this last year. So thank you for that. My good friend Jim Mills, who's long gone, the great senator here it started out, by the way, as a historian here in San Diego County. He was originally, his first big job was director of the San Diego Historical Society before he went into politics. So,
and a Coronado resident. And
a fascinating fellow. Anyway, so a little side there for you, but that's really key, because at that point, and I generally recommend this for most folks, though we've had a couple recently in La Mesa who we gave them the research, they wrote the reports, and both of them were approved last week, actually, at the commission meeting. So it can be done. Generally, if the project, you've got pretty good documentation already, who built it, who's significant, maybe only one or two owners. We had a couple nominations where it was like one owner family and a prominent architect. Pretty easy to gather enough research and to say, hey, this is why it's significant, to make the case if you're decent at writing. But otherwise, I often recommend that you hire the consultants who have the time and the expertise to knock that out for you, and they know how to run through the hurdles of this process for you. So anyway, that's sort of where we are. We're hoping to get more stuff cataloged and entered, but just reach out to us and we'll let you know what we can do to help. So the Coronado folks, why don't you have anything to add there?
Yeah, we're really pleased to let everybody know that we have over 30,000 historic photographs in our collection, and nearly all of them are searchable on our website, which is fantastic. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to find photos on there, just based on keyword searches and date ranges and things like that, but you can always reach out to us. That's the primary way to get a research appointment scheduled, to get research started with us, is reach out to us. We have a form on our website. You can give us a call. You can send us a general email to our info@coronadohistory.org email. You can even stop by, but we just can't do same day appointments because it usually takes us time to compile all the resources that we want to look at your property. And then all of Coronado newspapers are digitized and available through UC Riverside's California newspaper database. And we do have a link on our website to that, if sometimes it's hard to find if you just do a Google search. But if you can go to our website to try to navigate to find those, or you can just give us a call too, and we can help you navigate to the right place. Otherwise, we don't have our other catalog records or finding aids available on our website. A lot of them are still work in progress as we inventory and get to know our collections better. But we do, once you contact us, we can do that deep dive and see what else we have in the collection.
Awesome. All right. So our next question is, are there any restrictions or limitations on accessing certain records or materials? And if so, what are those? And we'll start with the county folks on that one.
I'll start off. So two things come to mind with this question. The first harkens back to when Jeanette was explaining about the public kiosks. I just wanted to make a useful note. This would probably help people when they're embarking on their research. A customer's first stop should really be those public kiosks that are located in all of ARCC's 5 locations. And that's because these kiosks allow on-site access to the public records that are recorded with the Recorder County Clerk, and they go from 1850 onward. You'll use a different application to view ones from different time periods, but they're there. And you don't need an appointment to conduct research on the kiosks. You can come in Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. One of the reasons why it's good to start there is because the archives doesn't have an original paper record for every recorded document from 1850 onward. At about 50 years ago, there was an administrative decision if we had a good microfilm image of the record, then we didn't need to keep the physical record. So we don't have everything in paper. And that's why it's good for you to start at the kiosk. And then if you find something on the kiosk, an image of a record, and you want to know if we have the original, you can reach out to us at the archives and we will check for you and we will pull it for you to view in our reading room if we do have it. The other sort of restriction that comes to mind is that there are laws surrounding access to birth, death, and marriage records in the state of California. And so that means that you do need to meet certain requirements and provide certain information in order to view or receive a copy of one of these vital records. And there's also a fee associated with that. I don't know if you have anything more to add on the birth, death, and marriage records, Jeanette.
No, but I do have another thing to add. For military discharges, the DD-214s, we do have those, but those images are not available to the general public. It would only be authorized persons who can get copies of those, but we do have those. If you're an authorized person, you can get a copy. A certified copy would act as an original, and a copy of a military discharge is usually free to the person who is the applicant, and they can get 3 copies, for free if they wanted to.
And then on the mapping side of things for the assessment records, the property appraisal records and the building records, they're restricted to property owners. So we only allow property owners to view those. We do have a form you can fill out if you're an acting agent, and we allow the agents to come in to view those as long as they have that signed form. Other than those appraisal records, everything else, maps, documents obviously will be recorded. Any work we do in what's called our cut work, where we make boundary changes to parcels, those are open to the public and those are viewable if somebody was interested to see how parcels changed over the years. And also, I did want to add another record our office has are any jurisdictional change records. So if you're interested to see when a city was annexed, we'll have those. When a fire protection district came to be, when it was created, when it was formed, when it was dissolved, we'll have those. So anything that has to do with jurisdictional changes, we have those records as well.
That's great. Yeah. And it just reminded, having someone who has worked on the form of the agent, little clues to you is make sure that your property owner, make sure they put the actual name that's on the deed. So if your property's in a trust, you need to make sure that's on the form, the actual name, not just the address or something. You need to make sure it has the actual name of the owner. If it's in a trust, make sure that name on there. That'll help them process it quickly. They do a great job processing those, but you got to have the form right. You got to have it signed by the owner or the agent, and then they can release it to us to help them with research, or you can lead them to do that. And it's a great service that they provide there to give you your basic building record, which is often gives you the first date, that the county has, that improvements were made, and any major subsequent permit changes are offered in those building record forms. That they give you a good starting point for you doing your research. So that's great. For La Mesa, I'll just say that generally we have ownership of the majority of our materials, vast majority of materials, but there are a few things that we know we have some photographs that probably are really the property of the History Center. So those kinds of things we can do fair use and show them to you, but we can't sell them to you. We would then guide you to them and say, oh, you need to purchase it from them. So there's a few of those things in the collection that people have given us over the years. Oh, here's a photo of, but it's actually one of the collections there at the History Center in Balboa Park. So there's a few of those little restrictions, but otherwise, we pretty much can, we have access and control of those things if you need to get copies, especially fair use copies, which you're not going to post it, you're not going to sell it, those kinds of things there. So probably our number one restriction at La Mesa is, as we mentioned, our limited hours and staffing. That sometimes it piles up. We get a lot of requests in. If people want to get their reports, usually they want to get their reports into the commission by October so they can make next year's tax break, because it has to be processed before the end of the year so they can get it to the recorder to record it there so they can get the process going. So sometimes we get a little rush in the summer of people wishing fast to do it, quickly, and we say, well, there's only so much time in the day, right, for us. But other than that, pretty much contact us and we'll see what we can do to help you out. So maybe the Coronado folks next.
So like any archival repository, we do allow for donor restrictions. So we have a robust oral history collection, and very few of them will have a donor restriction every now and then. And so the donor may say, we don't want somebody to, the person who was interviewed, they don't want that oral history to be seen yet, probably until a few years after it's passed. And every now and then, oral histories are really great for doing research on homes, because not only can you find out about maybe the owner, that'd be great if that was the oral history, but sometimes they're talking about their memories of a certain street or a certain block. And if we're really trying to figure out what did this house look like, that's a really great place to start. And then on the other side, one thing that we also do have that's accessible online is we have worked with the state library to send a lot of items out. So for example, the tax assessor logs are with them right now. And the nice thing about the state library is not only is it accessible on their website, but they can scan these very large format items that small historical societies cannot do ourselves. So it's really exciting, and we're looking forward to getting those completely scanned.
Great, great. Dana, anything to add?
Not really. We don't have any restrictions. We fully own all of our material, so we're very happy to be able to have public access to everything.
Great, great. And I just a couple comments. Oral histories are really very valuable. We have some too, and we're trying to get our program going again. Most of ours were done in the 70s and 80s. We finally got them digitized off the cassettes into a digital format. And what I did, I've done a couple papers on this about understanding what you get. I mean, oral histories are really great about sort of putting the context and the sort of feel and the association the community has with things. I would just be careful of factual date kind of things, because as we all know, as we get so older, our facts on dates and memories sometimes aren't as hot, but the context is what helps you out and gives you a real feel for something. So we go and get all these wonderful, didactic facts. Hey, it was built here, did this is the person who constructed it. To have that sort of, hey, and this is what we happened at the house, in case it's not a place that hits the newspaper, about all the parties they have and all, and some do, but many don't, right? They're not reporting to the neighbors, what they're doing or whatever, right? It's not going in the newspaper. Having those kinds of perceptions and memories of the place really helps fill that story out. And sometimes it can complement things, and sometimes it can contradict. But it helps give you that. It helps give you that sort of better whole feel of what the activity and the feel and the association of the place, which is something you're going to want to put in that nomination report. Why it's still there and why you think it's eligible is because it has those elements that are beyond just the physical materials and design, right? So really, those can be very helpful if you can get something like that, and maybe answer a bunch of questions that are never going to be published anywhere about the property, right? So that's really good stuff. All right, so our next question is, what can homeowners do to make the most of their visits to the archive when conducting research on their homes? And do we have any tips for identifying relevant archival materials and records for the research? So I'll just go first on this one. My recommendation is bring whatever good documentation you have, especially if you have any kind of title or deed records. The more things with names that we can start to chase and then confirm with directories or other things, you know, bring that to, if you can, with you. That'll help us trigger and get going faster. Certainly if you had that. The other was sort of, I mentioned early at the beginning, is you're going to need some persistence and some determination, some critical thinking and attention to detail, because unfortunately it is not as simple as entering it into the Google search and it all falls into your lap, right? Even at our archives, you know, our finding aid, sometimes it doesn't, like you said, we don't have everything in our systems that we'd like to yet. And so sometimes you need to really be open to knowing that you're going to head down a path, and then next week you find, oh, I didn't realize this address was actually part of the, now you got to come back and look at those sources again, and then you find it. And don't be surprised when you dig in the source where everybody else's property is there except yours. And we will run to this thing where we will search the typical sources. I have nothing in the vertical files. I have nothing in the newspaper hits. And yet you look at the picture of the house and go, wow, that's a nice 1950s house. Gosh, why can't we figure this? You know, and so you sometimes have to just be persistent and doggedly continue to make the search. And then you're going to, in some point, you're going to break through. You're going to find that contact to the family member who has the photo album, or you hit the right number or the right number and the street name change, and suddenly it opens up and there's your answers. So I would just say, just be ready to be persistent and dogged, and don't give up. And don't give up. That's the other part. There's something out there. There's some record somewhere. People don't. It may occasionally happen, but it's pretty rare that somebody could build a building that nobody knows about, because the tax assessor wants to know. I guarantee he wants to know. But everybody else does too. Anyway, so just sort of put that in there as a sort of general thing. Coronado, any thoughts on prepping folks for coming in?
The number one thing I would say is know what you want to know about your property. Most of our property researchers are going for historic designation within the city of Coronado, and there's very clear guidelines of what criteria to meet and what kinds of information is needed to complete an application. And the city does hire a third-party consultant now to do reports, but there is quite a bit that the homeowner or the applicant can still provide the city, which is important to know. But that might be somebody who's going for historic designation may be looking for different pieces of information than somebody who just wants to know the history of the people who lived there, or if there is any boundary dispute or anything of that nature. So really know exactly what you want to know. If you just want to come to us and say, I want to know everything there is to know about my house, that's going to take a lot more time maybe. And the expectations might be a little bit different than if it's somebody's coming with the idea of just making historic application or report. So know what you want to know before you come in. And to Jim's note about knowing the parcel number of your property, in Coronado specifically, knowing the lot and block number is also extremely helpful, because Coronado was originally set up very strategically and very well documented with lot and block numbers. Other communities in San Diego as well, but Coronado seems to kind of have maintained that over the years, and that can be sometimes the one thing I can identify with a property record is that lot and block number versus an address or the APNs, which didn't always exist. So those are the two things I would probably say for folks coming to work with us.
Great. Dana?
I would agree with that too. I think we're sort of similar to Coronado in that way, right? Yeah, I would say just give us as much information as you have, and then we go off from there. sometimes you have a name or an organization or something like that. And if we go and dig in these collections, we might not have thought about going into that collection. So just a wide variety of information is very helpful.
Great. County, any thoughts on, I think you gave us a little last time, but thoughts about coming in and helping the folks out?
Yeah, I think for the county, I mean, you guys all mentioned already, a lot of persistence, a lot of patience, and definitely come early. Some of these things, it may only take 30 minutes, an hour. Some of them can take the entire day, even days. So yeah, be ready to dedicate some time, because some of this type of research is time consuming. But try not to come here, like we close at 5, try not to come here at 4:30 and then expect it to be done in the same day. You might have to return the next day to complete your research, or so we can assist you find the document that you need. And like Jim said and the others said, bring as much information as you can. But if you have very little information, I mean, we can work with that. I mean, if you can point us to the parcel on the map, that's a good enough starting point for us to get you back to where you need to be in terms of the time frame. So yeah, it helps to have as much as you have, but if we can help you out if you have very, very little information on it.
I'd just
Great.
like to add one thing, something Jim said earlier about having an open mind. My top tip would be to come in ready to follow a lot of breadcrumbs. Because there will be bits of information in each recorded document that reference or otherwise lead you to other recorded documents, including maps. So if you're researching past ownership of your property and you're using the grantor and grantee indexes, that's a really good example, because you'll be starting with the earliest name that you've got, and you'll find that name in the grantee index, and then right across from it, it will list who the grantor was to that grantee. So then that's your breadcrumb. You have to follow it back to an earlier grantee index so you can find when that grantor was a grantee and who was the grantor to them, and back and back and back. So it's with the county collections, it's a lot of breadcrumbing. So just be prepared for that, and you'll find some really awesome things.
Yeah, and obviously it makes a big difference if your owner's name is Smith or Jones, or the owner or the developer is a real estate person who sold it to them, and they have hundreds of entries in, every year in those grantee and grantor books, right? So that's the part where I think, like I put, sometimes that needle's sitting on top of the haystack, and sometimes it's somewhere in the middle and you don't know where it is, and you're going to have to dig all the way through to get to it, right? I mean, that was my metaphor. Like the breadcrumb one is a good one as well. And just to give an example of one of the houses on this year's tour, I'm going to plug our tour at the end, but has been in 5 different subdivisions since it's been built in 1910. Okay, so it's a very, very nice piece of property, and the people all wanted it, I guess, in their subdivision. So those kinds of things where you might find all kinds of complex, things that sort of block your way to chase things back at times, or just make it very complex that you're going to have to really wade through it and collect all that stuff. So thanks everybody on that one. The next question we had is, how can homeowners effectively document and organize their findings from their research? Coronado, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So when you come in to see us, we actually do have some worksheets and different mechanisms to help you document, but we do love when you come in with your own information. Some people come with a lot of organization. We're here to help. Our number one advice is kind of to think about starting to create an occupancy list. So it kind of comes back to that grantor, grantee, or looking at directories. We want to figure out who's lived there over the years so that we can also figure out who was an owner, who was a tenant, and start to really dig in and see what kind of information we have about them. Were they involved in the community? Were they an officer at NASNY? It's really great to start with that occupancy list, and you can start with what you have and leave blanks. And so then as you go from archival repository to repository, you'll fill it in, because not everything will be found here at the Coronado Historical Association. You will need to go to the county. You might need to go over to the History Center. And so starting your process and having almost like a worksheet that we kind of make for you where you can fill it in is really helpful, because then you can organize yourself as you go from location to location.
Great points. Dana, want to add anything?
Yeah, and to tag on, I had the same thoughts in mind too. To tag on that, please do write down where you got each thing from, because you might need to go back later and find that document again for some reason. So it's nice to be able to say, oh, I got it from that box or that file or that place, that archive, you know. So I think organization is really, really important, so you don't frustrate yourself later.
Great point. County, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I just want to echo Dana. That was my first thought when I heard this question. I think a lot of us think of citing sources when we're talking about writing research papers or articles or books, but it's a really great habit to get into for yourself, just generally, always knowing where you got that fact or that document, and then your research will be much more manageable as it grows bigger and bigger.
Absolutely. And I'll just sort of add, you know, one of the things I always recommend, and I know that sometimes people, certain generational issue, I say, if you can get a paper copy, I would do it, of everything you can get. And I mean, or at least make sure you've got an image of it, because part of it is what you're going to do with it in the future when you sit down to do your analysis, right? Because once you lay it all out, you may find as you put the pieces together that your interpretation of what those facts means changes, right? Once you lay out and see various, you know, okay, I think this is a good point, and then you find some other sources that maybe make you interpret that differently, right? And so I think it's always good to have it all and organize it. And certainly the point of references is key, as we're not trained in grad school for that stuff for nothing, right? I mean, it's a practice, whether you do it digitally or in hard copy, to make sure you know where you got that source, because you often will need to return to that source to make sure you're interpreting it the right way based on maybe other things you've gathered. So I think that's always just a really good thing to have it. And so when I turn over a couple inches or something to somebody about their house, and they're like, wow, my gosh, you know, I only like these facts about it. Well, yeah, but this is the context. This is the historian thing, right? This is the context to help you understand and interpret those facts in a way that you can feel confident that you've got solid interpretation and documentation to back your statements of whatever that is in a report or in the history of your house. So that's sort of my little piece there. Is it's very key to keep organized and make sure you know where you have everything. So I'm on board with that. All right. The next question is, how can archival research be used in conjunction with other research methods or sources to create a comprehensive history of a historic home? And I'll start with Dana on that one.
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me, because I'm not really sure. I'm interested to hear what everyone else is going to have to say on that.
Okay, well, we'll hold you off then. County, you have any thoughts on that?
I think just remembering that archives are found in literally every industry that exists, that there's government archives, university, law enforcement, community, business, architecture, humanities, sciences. There's quite literally any industry you can think of, there are archival collections. So for example, if you're trying to figure out who built your home, you can try to find out if the architect's papers or the architecture firm's records are being collected at an archive somewhere. Just again, harking back to what Jim said, it's that open mind, and just knowing that it's literally everywhere if you just put in the legwork and get creative, and also share what you've found with other people. Because a lot of times, I mean, there's a lot of joy in this sort of research personally for yourself, but you never know what you can learn from somebody else and what avenue you can hear about from somebody else's research journey. And also you might open some of those same doors for other people. So yeah, that's all.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think at first I was, sort of lenient on some of the things that Christine mentioned about oral histories, things that can help sort of complement and supplement the facts, right? The hard record stuff that helps you understand a little bit more about the property and the people. That's always good to supplement and complement, because not everything is documented, right? Not everything is going to end up, things you might want to know aren't always going to be there. But I think that's, the other part I was just mentioned too is why this session is very important is, as a historian knows, your best friend is an archivist. because as much as everybody wants to get their finding aids and everything is detailed and all in there, and we'll all hope to get there one day, when you step in and ask the archivist and tell them what you're looking for, they know in the back of the head. And I remember this when I was doing a lot of work as a consultant in the early 90s, evaluating all the military bases here in Southern California. And I'd walk into National Archives and she'd say, which one this time? And I'd said, oh, this is it. And this is what I'm looking for. She said, oh, well, here's what's in this. But there's this unprocessed stuff that you should look at. Right. And suddenly I had exactly what I needed on that particular facility at that base that yet hadn't been fully processed, but was in enough shape that they could share it with me. Right. And they, and so that's the other thing, is just take advantage of our knowledge and our expertise to help you, because it may be that we'll tell you you have to go somewhere else, but that's going to save you a lot of time and grief, right? Is to know that, oh gosh, these guys have, or you know what you should look in? I never thought about looking in that, but now that you've mentioned what you're looking for, why don't we look over here? And guess what? You find something. So I think that's the other part of it, is take advantage of the expertise and knowledge of all our institutions and the other repositories in the county, whether that's, fully staffed folks like History Center, or other, full volunteer groups like Lemon Grove or Santee or Mountain Empire, or wherever you're going to go out, see if they have stuff for you. Just make sure you take advantage of checking in there. So that's sort of my little piece. So I guess that, Vicki, you have any, or oh no, you guys.
Yeah. I would just add on to that too, that really it's an investigative process. You're a detective and you're trying to find all these little pieces of information to pull together a history of your home. And so it's not just looking at all these different archival institutions that may have information about your home, but also knowing that they're not encyclopedic and they don't have everything. Talk to your neighbors, talk to maybe former owners, and see if they have in their own personal family collections things that might be of use. As Dana said with the La Jolla Historical, is same with Coronado, is our collection's really grown from people in the community. And so we know we have large gaps in our collection of maybe certain areas of town or certain communities are less represented. And so the more that you can also investigate using archival resources, but also using leaning in on your own community members, your neighbors, and family members and stuff is really important, I think, too, as part of the research process.
Great. So Dana, you want to add anything now, or?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking along the lines of, because you said, aside from archival research. So I know here in La Jolla, there are a lot of people who have been here for a very long time. So if you can hook in with people like that, maybe business owners or families that have been in the area for a long time, or if you can find your local historian, which could be in a historical society, association, or the Women's Club is, like you mentioned before, is a good resource. So people who have been embedded in the community for a long time, sometimes if you just sit down and talk to them, you never know what could come out of the conversation.
Great. Okay, well, we're up to our last pattern question. So here we go. Hopefully we can open it up after this one. So, and that's just as, what are some common mistakes or pitfalls that homeowners should avoid when conducting research in your archives, which we've covered a little bit. If there's anything else we can add on that. So we'll start with the county folks.
I think we sometimes get questions like, this is my address, or this is my property. Can I see all the records that are associated with it? Or sometimes it's, here's this topic. Can I see everything you have on this topic? And one thing that I've heard from some of the other panelists is that you do keep vertical files, subject files, things of that nature. It's a little different in our government archives. Our staff does not curate or keep subject files or subject specific collections. Our role as a government archives in the recorder's office is to collect, preserve, and make accessible all of the recorded documents that have permanent retention. And it's not really our role in this government archives to decide which documents go together. So that's where that legwork and that research really comes in. And you'll likely want to consult records in the county archives, which represents the recorder county clerk division, also the assessors division, but also records of other county departments and other city departments in order to uncover the whole picture from a, government archives perspective in this area.
Great points.
I have a couple things I can add. This is Jeanette. The previous parcel numbers may have changed on some of the properties. And so if somebody can come in and look at the master property record with the realty staff, that would be a great help. Also, while conducting searches online for documents, people forget to change the search dates. So make sure while you're filling out that information that you put in the correct dates that you'd like to search. I think also the archives doesn't conduct searches for people, but they will help you navigate the digital reel or somebody in the recorder clerk. So they don't conduct the searches, but they can get the people that help you learn how to do it yourself.
Great point. Great point. Yeah, your institution is a little different in its mission and purpose. So that's good that you called out. But you're extremely valuable because you have all those wonderful documents that we need to get our hands on. I guess I'll go next. I think some of the pitfalls, folks, we sort of covered this a little bit. I'll just quickly, stopping before you've really done a comprehensive search, right? Getting going and getting either stumble or think I've got the first answer. That's all I need. I'm there. Also, that assuming that one fact is full confirmation sometimes on things. You do need to try to corroborate that with more than one if you can. I mean, sometimes that's all you got. You got to go with it, but make sure that you also try to, get as much corroborating information you can to make your determinations. And so that, giving up before it's time. The other one that probably, I'm sure we've all felt is this assumption by folks out there who believe that everything in the world should already be digitized. Because even as much as we would love to, and we're actually working on a grant with San Diego State as a pilot digitization project, for some of our stuff, it is far from close to being correct. That especially when you're doing local research, local history, and community history, that everything is yet digitized, and all we have to do is just get into the right database and just punch in the word, and it all pops up as we sort of discussed. So that's probably the thing when people come in, well, don't you have it all on? Why isn't it all on your website? And why isn't it something you can just print out for me right now, right? It's just, unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. We would love to get there someday. Do the old Star Trek, hit the lapel and it brings it all up for us or whatever, right? We're not quite there yet. Things have gotten a lot better from when I used to have to drive to Orange County to look at the census on microfilm at the National Archives, now through Ancestry, and I'm not promoting, but there's a lot of material now they have from voting records, the directories, that stuff. So if you get a subscription with them, you can get to a lot of some of these things, especially those genealogical types of things, now that were not accessible easily online, which now are a lot faster for we can access and get you to them as well, even if they're not in our collection. So that's sort of my net pitfall is don't assume it's all digitized yet. Come in and check with us. Coronado, you want to go?
So I actually have some pitfalls that are very specific to Coronado. And we've actually seen professional historians make these mistakes. So it's easy to make these mistakes. But specific to Coronado, one thing you really have to be careful about is, was the house moved? We can go down the rabbit hole of a lot number or an address, especially looking at the city building permits that we have on site, and then not know that it was moved. And so we've seen reports written about this house, and it has nothing to do with what's actually there. And a lot of homes were moved all over the island. And then the second kind of specific Coronado thing, which is really interesting, is was what was advertised to be designed or sold what actually was built. And so since we do have every single Coronado newspaper digitized, even including Tent City, and it is, you can easily do a subject keyword search online. It's easy to say, oh, look, here's an advertisement of, an Irving Gill that was built at this spot. And, Irving Gill decided, oh, I don't want to be on that project anymore. And that was never actually built. And so we've had people say, okay, well, that must have been torn down or it was completely remodeled, but no, it was never even built. So those are kind of the very specific Coronado things, but that's the fun of doing the research. And the pitfalls that you can make just as a researcher is that idea that you go with that first assumption, like you were saying, Jim, saying, great, I found something in the newspaper, it's digitized, it's a newspaper, we're good to go, instead of really digging in deep. And one thing that happens a lot here in Coronado is this idea of that it was a named architect, that it was William Templeman Johnson. And just because everybody says that doesn't mean it was. We really have to dig in deep. So those are kind of the pitfalls we have here.
Yeah, good points. Dana, you wrap this one?
I think Christine said it. This is fun. So slow down and enjoy yourself going through the process. Don't try to go too fast because you miss something, But I think, well, coming from a history background, it's fun for me. May not be fun for everyone, but I think there are fun elements to it. And when you can put the faces of different people and put them into historic context, not only just the history of the house, the numbers and whatever, but to make your home come alive.
Great points. And thanks everybody. So that's a credit question. I'll just say it was one of the things I was going to talk about, and that's the difference between a permit and a notice of completion. Right. And that's come up many times in many of the communities around here. And like I mentioned, I have these wonderful, Southwest builder and contractors with news and permits all listed. But you gotta confirm that. It'd be good to confirm it with an actual permit with the names. We'd confirm that with a notice of completion. I know we had one in West La Mesa a couple years ago that everybody's convinced it was Lloyd Rocco. Even Leonard Smith thought it was, and we're pretty sure it wasn't. Now that we dug into it, it was somebody who worked with one of his colleagues, probably. So who knows if those wonderful oral histories turned into somebody who used to work for Lloyd designed this into Lloyd designed this, right? And so there's those kinds of things you have to sort of, catch. I have another, fun story about a house, one of the ones that just got listed. It has a public walkway that goes from the street below up to its backyard. And then it's one in La Mesa. We've got some of those lovely, subdivisions with our steep hills, staircases between the streets thing. And this one happens to be off by itself. And when it was up for sale about a year and a half ago, when this individual bought it, and everybody who came to the open house told the agent and everybody that, yeah, that was put in because that's where the mayor lived and he wanted to get to City Hall faster, right? And so, of course, we finally get into the research and dig into it and find out that the guy who built the house turned out to be significant enough and eventually going to get listed that, but he built the staircase because he hadn't had the funds to pave the street back around the hill to get to the front of the house, right? And it's in the paper, and it actually said that, hey, they've just completed their staircase while they're waiting for their improvements on the street, right? But the lore, a lot of fun story, right? One fourth story turned out not to be true, but so just sort of gathering some sort of, be careful, have fun with it. Like Data says, have fun with it. You're going to find fascinating people. And sometimes they're going to surprise you with some of the stuff we've learned on different houses over the years. I guess my first step is, since we've got a little bit of time here, is do any of our panelists have questions for our other panelists? Or have we've all answered our own questions? Speaking of notice of completions in the county, those are under which records? Do you guys, is that miscellaneous books? Oh, I haven't looked in a while.
Notices there are certificates of completion in the miscellaneous books.
Okay. So there's a source that sometimes is helpful if you're having trouble finding is to confirm that, because I think the county didn't even require building permits to like 1931 or something like that officially, but they use the notice of completions to trigger the assessment through the assessor office or something like that. So they recorded those. So that's another source, to know that the system and how it worked back then to get some information.
I will just mention one other thing, Jim.
Yeah, sure.
Building permits are not recorded documents.
Right.
So
Correct.
Those you'll have to find outside of the county archives.
Yeah, and that depends on, and that's a challenge, especially like I said, I just know the county ones when they started coming up in the Builder and Contractor in 31 and in some of the newspapers, and union starts prints them for a while till it gets to be too many, and then they stop all of them stop printing them. But in the case of the city of La Mesa, they microfished all theirs about 40 years ago, but they only made one set. And so, of course, we're working with our good friend, the city clerk, who, of course, cannot let them out of the building because she only has one set. So we couldn't send that one out for digitizing. So we're working on raising the money to bring somebody in because they would love to have them digitized just as much as the researchers would, right? And so those are the kinds of sort of things you'll run into is, oh yeah, those records exist, but they're only available certain appointments, certain days, and you got to be very specific. And, oh, and that property just happens to have changed addresses and street names 3 times. All those kinds of fun things that will help, make it not as simple as like you guys are saying, you come to the desk, give me the answer, right? It's not always that simple. So you just have to be prepared for some of those challenges as you're doing your research. So Dean, do we have any questions from our folks, our participants? Oh, you're muted. Don't worry, everybody has to do it at least once.
Oh, sorry about that. We did have a question that I typed an answer to about searching for City Heights properties, and I suggested also the San Diego City Clerk's archives. We invited them to be here today, but nobody was available, unfortunately. But that is another valuable archive, and they've got lots of photos too. But yeah, you can Google them.
Yeah, the city of San Diego actually is another place where a lot of times they have access to some of the older water permits as well, and utilities would help you also, just like a tax assessor, pin down when an improvement actually starts getting used. Because you had to have by the 20s you had to code, you had to be hooked up to water and sewer and all those kinds of things. So those can and you go downtown to their place, and that's a good place to look into for the kind of records for the city. And just remember, though, that some parts of the city weren't in the city maybe when your house was built. So like in Kensington, there's 3 different annexation periods, depending on what part of Kensington you're in. Rolando didn't come in until 1954, for example. So these ones I just know about. So sometimes, in East San Diego was its own city until 1923, which is City Heights today, right? So some of those things you have to just also know a little of that history to help you realize that maybe those records aren't at the city because they didn't cover that when your house was built, and you have to look into the county records or other places. So that's another little trick that you'll learn. And certainly there's also, like I mentioned, several historical groups in the mid-city, sort of older neighborhoods. You've got Mission Hills Heritage and University Heights Historical and South Park and North Park. And there's a historic group here in Kensington and in Talmadge. So there's other groups that you can reach out to and check for their access that could help you maybe look on your house. And if not, certainly give me a call. I have some City Heights stuff. We can see if we can't get you headed in the right direction to find out some more information on that area as well. Looking at a couple of the questions here. Panelists have any comment on the San Diego History Center? Of course, they are the regional local history repository, have been around for almost a century now, and certainly their archives are available. And they have a lot of the same kind of things and even more collections, including, I think they have the San Diego Union Photo Morgue and other things. They have millions of photos in their collection. So you can check on their open hours and check in with them. That's a great place to do research. The public library, the California Room, I haven't been down there in a while, but that's another place that we used to spend a fair amount of time in local history research. They also have collections. I know they have some of the Spreckles Company collections, I think. When I did some research on our Coronado people's ears pop up, the Spreckles Company collection, some that I did when I was researching their tire factory and their oil company and some other things back in the good old days. So certainly check with them. I believe that's up on can't remember, it's one of the top floors, if not the top floor, at the downtown Central Library. And they have some local collections as well. That's another good place to check into. Let's see, this is a very detailed question. Simplest way to research a property that began as a 160-acre homestead in 1862 and subsequently was subdivided, divided again into 2-acre parcels. Valley Center. Well, you're gonna have to, that's pretty old for us here in San Diego. You're gonna probably need to certainly check in with the county, but also possibly the History Center to see if they have some of those 19th century records. But you're going to probably, the other part of it, something like that, is try to catch some kind of record of it, maybe a little farther up around the turn of the century or something. And so you have a way to chase it back, back that far. Obviously, it was a fairly small place. Probably the population of the county in 1862, non-Native American, would probably have been about 2,500 or so for the whole county, which probably also included Riverside County at that time. Probably it's not Riverside County. So there's tons of stuff. Interesting enough, at state parks, we've collected a fair amount of those things in our Old Town State Historic Park archives, some things, not necessarily that far out, but certainly about what was going on in San Diego at that period. So once again, it might be checking with the sort of standard folks, and then you may need to go dive into some other place. I would also, check with the folks at Escondido Historical. They have a decent archive there, and they're associated, I believe, with the library at the city. See if they maybe have some additional connections to that area before even anybody called it Valley Center. So that would be my initial cause. Anybody else thoughts on answer for that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know that there's a simple way. Sometimes there might be. The first thing you try might be, the jackpot. But I think if you obviously know where the property is, you could start as far back as looking at some of the patent books and seeing which land patents were first granted once California became a state and San Diego became a county. There's going to be, like I mentioned before, breadcrumbs. There's going to be references to maps. And then when you go and you look at that map image, there might be something in the description on that map that references, township, public land survey township information. You can then follow that breadcrumb. So it's really like breadcrumby. If you do know present day APN and you want to start from the present and work your way back, there's a way to look up the APN and see if there's an associated subdivision map or a parcel map connected to it. And then sometimes you can follow breadcrumbs back and back and back that way. Prior maps done of the area, then those maps sometimes will have a reference on them to deeds or other things. So I think just based on the question, it seems like some of the record types you might be interested in would be patents, deeds, subdivision maps. Those are the ones that jump to my mind initially. And again, that research is going to start at those public kiosks where you can do keyword searches or you can search with filters and things like that. I hope that answered your question.
And another thought that I just came up by, last time I looked, the BLM may have actually digitized some of the homestead records. And so you might want to do a search, because when I see that date, 1862, which I believe is when the act was actually passed, the historian concern in me thinks, is that really the year it was homesteaded, or is that somebody quoting the act's date? So I would really try to find the actual documentation for the homestead to see what year it actually is and to whom it was given. It could be, but maybe it's a little later. Maybe it's a different year, but it's, someone cited in the record somewhere, the Homestead Act of 1862 doesn't necessarily mean the homestead was done in 1862. And that's where you want to check to see if maybe, because that's all from the old General Land Office, which we all know now as the Bureau of Land Management. So that's other part of knowing your civics, right? Of understanding a federal agency who oversaw that. And I'm not sure if there's a homestead book in the old records at the county. If that was, I know there's mining records and others, but if there was ever a homestead, but it's probably within the patents book. Is that what you think?
There are a few Declaration of Homestead books, and then you might also see some of those records in the miscellaneous series.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I know, have we worn them out, Dean?
We had a couple more. One says, how do you find out if a particular person rented and it says 1950s? Is there anybody have any thoughts on that?
Your first goal would be to look in the directories. And what's interesting about the directories is usually there's a little O next to somebody, and then sometimes there's not a little O next to their name. And what that little O means is they were the owner. And so if there's not an O, there very might mean that they were a renter. They're just the occupant of the property. Now, that's not 100% confirmation, but that's the general thing, and that's often when we go do searches when we get these names. Like like you heard say, where you put that list of names and dates and everything you get out of the directories or wherever, newspaper articles. The other thing is to search that person or that address in the newspapers at that time to see if something pops out. And it could be anything from a report of a car accident that, renter Joe Smith. I mean, you never know when those kinds of things might pop up, who lives at this address, right? Because then when you go to search the deed records, it's not going to have that renter's name on it, right? Because they're not the owner. It's going to have the owner's name. And so that's the other part of what we're talking about, the sort of hunt and peck and put the pieces together. So that's the one that jumps out at me would start with directories. And directories can be inaccurate and have missing years, and somebody didn't fill out the form that year, and so it shows vacant or whatever. But that's probably the first place to check to see if you can try to confirm, somebody of significance who may have just been renting, never owned the property, but you want to associate it with the fact that they lived there for 10 years or something and did something significant while they were living there, even though they never owned the property.
The other one would be the federal census records would be a good place to take a peek. Those aren't mandatory for people to fill out, but gosh darn it, I hope everybody does. And I hope that the person you're looking for did.
Yeah, and those are available up to 1950 now. And even though the amount of data continues to shrink as each census moves forward, if you get into those ones, 1900, 1910, there's amazing amounts of information about people's parents, about where they came from, immigration status, all kinds of amazing information in those US censuses that now up to the 1950 census sheets are available for public, and you can get them on Ancestry, and there's other places you can get it to them. Which are just amazing sources of, like I said, detailed information about people. And yes, and sometimes a house gets missed and a family gets missed, even if they're prominent. That's part of just, like I said, the foibles of running through this stuff. How could they not have been in the census? Maybe they were out of town for a couple of weeks when the census person came in. I know a whole neighborhood, I think in the 1940 census in Grossmont, where it's clear they didn't go down those streets. Check those census tracts. This guy missed those streets, didn't go down those streets. So it's just the way it goes, so that's when I say about that wonderful source that your property just happens not to be in it. But don't give up, keep plowing away at it.
Hey, we have one more question. The city claims to have lost most development records before the 1950s. I'm in the College area. Any place else but the county to look? And what year was La Mesa annexed? Okay, so I do have some on that. So when I first started, my first big project was to review the old Savage Tire Factory Aztec Brewery building down. And I went in, and the first thing when I asked about old building and tax records was that somebody took all the building permits in the city of San Diego, 1955 and before, and decided to throw them away because there was no value to the city to keep them, quote unquote. And so far, every person I've ever talked to who's worked said, yeah, there's no trace of anything prior to 1955 when it comes to building permits at the city. They count on, assessor records and that kind of stuff. So don't give up on that. Now, just happens the College area is, when I started the College Neighborhoods History Project back in the mid-90s, we have a pretty good database, and we use building permits and newspaper articles and stuff. So certainly come check with us at the Mesa History Center. And we have all the subdivision map and all the advertisements. One of the other things that the collection that I have that's now incorporated is in my exciting youth life, when I lived close enough to San Diego State to walk there in the evenings, is I went through every home development section of the paper from 1904 to 1970, looking for cool, interesting information about pretty much East San Diego stuff to capture. So we actually have binders by neighborhood with all the ads, especially the tract homes that start coming in after the war. We have all the ads and that kind of stuff. So we should be able to dig into your property in the College area and get a pretty good handle on it. It's an area that we cover now at La Mesa History Center, since that group I was working with back then has since been dispersed. So that'll help you on that specific thing. We could probably get you some direction on that. So once again, those challenges, it is in fact everything I've heard from anybody from the city that, yeah, all their building permit records were disposed back in 1955 because, as Kira mentioned, they're not retainable public documents technically. Many cities wish they sometimes had some of them back, but they're not required by law to be
I guess, preserved. And the assessor just needs to know how much to charge you taxes today. They're not all that thrilled. Though we like their historical information, they're more interested. And that's the other thing. If you look at some of these tax assessor databases and you'll see a date, like it says, I've had a lot of times people and they've got their teens Craftsman house and we look in the database and it says 1974 under year built in that field under the assessor's records. And the reason is because that's the year the assessor, a permit was pulled that required a reassessment of the property. And that's why that's in that field. So it doesn't mean your building was necessarily built in 74. It means somebody pulled a permit that required the assessor to change the assessment. So that's another one of those little tricks that, you know, when I'll pull up my printout of some database from about 2000 that we use as a starting point sometimes, and it'll have a date and everybody goes, there's no way, look, it's a Craftsman bungalow. You know, you're right, because somebody pulled a permit though, because they changed the assessment. So those are the kinds of other little tricks about reading all these records. And folks at the county can help you, and folks in our institutions can help you to help decipher some of that stuff. So you're not scratching your head going, why would it say 1974 when it's clearly, you know, something from the teens, that kind of thing.
We had another question come in. It looks like you just answered that though. And I believe that is it. All
Great.
right. Anybody has anything else? I have a
Just-
few. Oh, sorry,
Just
go ahead.
thanks to all of our panelists. Thanks, this was great. I hope everybody who watches this today or is going to watch it in the future will give you a starting point to dig into this. Your house's history, you never know what you're going to find. You never know what you're going to find. So people, buildings, designers, all kinds of fascinating stories.
Yes, and thank you from SOHO to everybody that made this event possible. We appreciate you all being here, and we hope everybody who attended has enjoyed it and found it meaningful. And hopefully we can have future opportunities to explore, learn, and celebrate our shared history together. And I wish everybody a wonderful afternoon.
Great.
Thank you.